The night sky over Hanoi exploded in light. Hundreds of surface-to-air missiles streaked upward, their trails painting deadly arcs against the darkness.
Red ground, stood up. Roger, Pinto, mark your position on bullseye for list. Stand by.
And Red Brown, list, confirm that that is a change in our drag target.
List is and we're 100 degrees, 115 miles.
Somewhere above those missile batteries, flying at 33,000 feet, dozens of B-52 Stratofortresses released their payloads. Each aircraft carried 30 tons of explosives. Each three-ship formation could obliterate an area the size of 3 football fields. By dawn, 1,624 civilians would be dead. The Bach Mai Hospital lay in ruins. The Kham Thien residential district had ceased to exist. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back 8 years, to when America first unleashed the most lethal weapon system ever deployed in human warfare. On June 18, 1965, 27 B-52 bombers took off from Guam on a mission that would redefine modern warfare. Their target was a suspected Viet Cong stronghold 50 miles north of Saigon. The B-52 Stratofortress wasn't designed for this. Built to carry nuclear weapons deep into Soviet territory, it was a Cold War relic being repurposed for a hot war in the jungle. But the modifications transformed it into something unprecedented. The B-52D Big Belly variant could carry 108 500-pound bombs. That's 60,000 pounds of explosives in a single aircraft. A standard 3-ship cell using radar-directed bombing could drop 648 bombs in a single pass. The impact zone measured roughly 1.2 miles by half a mile. Everything inside that box simply ceased to exist. This was Operation Arclight, and between June 1965 and August 1973, B-52s would fly 126,615 sorties over into China. They would drop 2.7 million tons of bombs, more than any single weapon system had ever delivered in human history. But here's what most people don't realize. Those 2.7 million tons were only part of the story. In early 1968, roughly 20,000 North Vietnamese troops surrounded a remote marine base called Khe Sanh. The siege lasted 77 days. It could have been America's Dien Bien Phu. That's when General Westmoreland made a decision. He called in the B-52s. That's likely the most concentrated bombing in human history. More explosive power per square mile than anything before or since. A North Vietnamese soldier who survived wrote that the ground itself became liquid. Trees were shredded into matchsticks. Entire hillsides disappeared. When the siege lifted, American forces estimated 15,000 enemy casualties, most killed by air power, most of those by B-52 strikes. But Khe Sanh was just the beginning. Because in 1969, President Nixon authorized something that wouldn't become public knowledge for years. On March 18, 1969, B-52s began bombing Cambodia. Operation Menu, as it was codenamed, was conducted in total secrecy. Congress didn't know, the American public didn't know. Even the pilots didn't always know they were crossing the border. Over the next 4 years, B-52s dropped roughly 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia. That's more tonnage than America dropped on Japan during all of World War II, including the atomic bombs. The targets were supposed to be North Vietnamese sanctuaries along the border, but the bombs didn't recognize borders. They didn't distinguish between enemy bases and farming villages. Historians estimate between 50,000 and 150,000 Cambodian civilians died in the bombing campaign. But the body count wasn't the only consequence. In 1970, the Khmer Rouge numbered fewer than 10,000 fighters. By 1973, they had over 200,000. Yale historian Ben Kiernan documented something chilling. The bombing didn't just fail to destroy the enemy, it created one. Peasants who lost family members to B-52 strikes became some of the Khmer Rouge's most dedicated recruits. 4 years after the bombing ended, the Khmer Rouge took power. What followed was genocide, 1.7 million Cambodians dead. The B-52 strikes didn't cause the Cambodian genocide, but they helped create the conditions that made it possible. And then, in December 1972, the B-52 faced its bloodiest test. The Paris peace talks had stalled. President Nixon needed leverage. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger told him the B-52s would shake the North Vietnamese to their core. Nixon's response was blunt. They're going to be so goddamn surprised. They were, but so were the B-52 crews. Over 12 days, Strategic Air Command launched 729 B-52 sorties against Hanoi and Haiphong. The target list included power plants, transportation hubs, communication facilities, and airfields. What they were flying into was the most heavily defended airspace in history. North Vietnam had over 1,000 surface-to-air missile sites protecting the capital.
Colonel, what is Linebacker II to someone that's a student of history who maybe doesn't know the details of the Vietnam War and those last few weeks of the war?
Linebacker II was after the Paris peace talks were disrupted, and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger told President Nixon that they left in December, 13th of December. He gave the North Vietnamese an ultimatum, come back in 72 hours. They refused and said they might not even release our POWs. So he said, I'm tired of this. I'm going to send in my big guns, which were the B-52s. They carried 84 750-pound bombs in the bomb bay and 12 on each wing. So you flew in 3 ship cells. It was 5/8 of a mile wide and 2 miles long. He sent those in. We had over half of our B-52 fleet committed to ending the war, which Linebacker II started on December 18th and went to the December 29th, although we did not fly Christmas Day.
So over the 11 days of the bombing, what was the goal?
The goal was to free our POWs, which we accomplished. All 591 came home. We started flying them back on C-141 on February 13th, or no, 12th. And the last one came back, I think, around March 29th. So we freed our POWs. We were tired of the conflict in Vietnam, so we signed the peace agreement and brought our planes and people home.
15 B-52s were shot down. 92 crew members were killed, captured, or listed missing in action. It was the highest loss rate of strategic bombers in U.S. history, but the destruction on the ground was catastrophic. The official North Vietnamese count put civilian deaths at 1,624. Some sources claim over 2,300. Bach Mai Hospital took a direct hit. 28 medical staff died. The Cam Thien residential district was leveled. 287 people killed in a single night, 55 of them children. Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme compared what happened in Hanoi to Guernica, to Lidice, to Treblinka. 12 days after it began, Linebacker II ended. Hanoi agreed to return to the peace talks. Nixon and Kissinger claimed victory. The bombing had worked. Or had it? Because here's what the B-52 statistics don't tell you. Those 2.7 million tons weren't the whole story. They were only about 35% of the total bombing campaign. F-4 Phantoms, F-105 Thunder Chiefs, a 6 Intruders, a 7 Corsairs. Together they dropped nearly twice what the B-52 did. And then there was artillery. U.S. forces fired over 10 million artillery rounds in Vietnam, nearly half of it as harassment and interdiction fire. Unobserved shells lobbed at map coordinates, often into populated areas. Add it all up, 7.66 million tons of explosives dropped on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. 3.5 times more than all combatants used in the entire Second World War. The Vietnam War killed between 2 and 3.8 million Vietnamese. Most historians estimate around 3 million total deaths. The vast majority weren't killed in firefights. They weren't killed by bullets. They were killed from above. Aerial bombardment was the single largest cause of death in the Vietnam War, and the B-52 Stratofortress was the most lethal individual weapon platform ever deployed in the conflict. But it didn't win the war. The Pentagon Papers documented it. The Jason reports confirmed it. After 18 months of Operation Rolling Thunder, there was no measurable direct impact on North Vietnamese operations in the South. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara himself testified that he didn't believe the bombing had significantly reduced the actual flow of men and material to the South. President Johnson privately admitted the bombing yielded a net result of 0. Indeed, less than 0. And the bombs are still killing. Laos remains the most heavily bombed country per capita in history. 1 plane load of bombs every 8 minutes for 9 years. 80 million unexploded bomblets still contaminate the soil. Since 1975, more than 50,000 people have been killed or maimed by unexploded ordnance in Laos alone. About 40% of the victims are children. The B-52 was history's most destructive single-weapon platform. No other aircraft has dropped more tonnage across more countries in any conflict. But the war's true killing machine wasn't one bomber. It was an entire system. The capacity to deliver industrial-scale firepower against a peasant society, and the willingness to do it. Curtis LeMay once promised to bomb them back into the Stone Age. In many ways, he succeeded, just not in the way he intended. The Vietnam War ended 51 years ago, but its weapons are still taking lives. Its lessons are still being ignored, and its legacy is still unfolding across 3 countries that bear the scars of the most intensive bombing campaign in human history. If you want to understand how this war shaped modern conflict, how bombing strategies evolved from Vietnam to Iraq to today, hit subscribe. We're covering the weapons, the tactics, and the human cost that textbooks leave out. This is history that matters, because the decisions made above the clouds of Hanoi still echo in how wars are fought today.